been a bit since Arcane Season 2 has been released, and ever since watching it, I just can't get the show out of my head. Just enjoying such a wild ride for the show of an IP that has had such a huge impact in my life. From the childlike naivety of the first season, going into the hardened, more pessimistic version of themselves in the second season, we get to see the evolution of not only just the characters, but also of the show's maturity. After rewatching the first season since I last saw it 3 years ago, truthfully, I was a bit too harsh on the show when I first watched it. I forgot how well the characters were made. It's kind of like watching an episode of Breaking Bad with how in-depth the characters are and how fleshed out their universe is. Every character had this fatal flaw about them, and no one was the all-encompassing good guy or bad guy, and the lines for them were such gray areas that's taken up a notch in Season 2 with their moral ambiguity. From the music, character writing, to its color palette and framing, Fortiche takes a video game IP and molds it into a fascinating story for fans, as well as giving it some bite for people who aren't even familiar with the League of Legends IP. It was also nice watching the show with someone who knew nothing about the League of Legends universe, and seeing them fall in love with some of the characters as well, not really caring about the lore and just enjoying the ride that it is.
So, I didn't really know much about League of Legends lore. I didn't even know there was lore to League of Legends. But this show, it just really hit me. It was really emotional. It made me laugh and cry. It just wrecked my heart in the best way. The writing, the art styles, it's just really beautifully done.
There's so much that the show does well, and taking a closer look at it gives even more appreciation for both Riot Games and Fortiche with how much thought and energy they place into every single frame of the adaptation. With small details and not just Easter eggs, but in shot composition and visual and audible language. Things like the alternate universe episode Pretend Like It's the First Time. The song playing in the background of the opening scene is the opening theme for the Chinese version of Arcane. Or how in the same episode when Echo sees Powder for the first time, there's a reflection of Jinx before it's taken over by Powder. There's so many nuances and deliberate choices made by the creators that help Arcane ascend past just a television adaptation and into the world of art. And that's what we'll be focusing on in this video, doing a deep dive and breaking down what makes the show such a cinematic masterpiece. Animation has always had a fascinating relationship with film, adapting and changing throughout the decades, creating more imaginative and creative stories that we couldn't visually tell otherwise. During the Disney boom spanning from the 90s to the present, the company has been a strong indicator of what traditional animation and art should look like for TV and film. However, as with every era in entertainment, things eventually come to an end.
Is that it? What happens next?
We're living in an age of animation where hyper-realism and the conformed Disney look is becoming less sought after, with studios willing to take a chance on more stylized approaches. And Arcane takes a chapter out of this book, utilizing both 2D and 3D aspects to create the world of Runeterra. With the company Fortiche, Arcane fuses both 3D renders and oil painting technique to create a world that both feels realistic but also fantastical at the same time. Creating these beautiful paintings using 2D techniques to exaggerate their animation, to accentuate highlights, exaggerate body movements, and utilize detailed backdrops with an insane attention to detail. The visual language of the show is also something that was fun to watch and dissect, using camera angles and framing that at least I don't normally see happening very often in animation. Especially in Season 2, the show is a lot more bold with its composition and complexity. Dutch angles, dolly zooms, POV, mounted, snorri cam, split diopters. There's just a lot going on in the show that separates it from what you would traditionally see coming from an animated series. One of my favorite scenes to dissect is from the message hidden within the pattern, because there's so much to take away from the scene where Isha sacrifices herself. It's interesting how the show uses 3 different forms of art styles to convey different emotions. We have our traditional Arcane art style, akin to something like an oil painting with in-depth colors, shading, and detail, before we move into a distant memory montage, using watercolors to show innocence and simplicity with softer blends of color. Flashbacks are very common within Arcane, with multiple ones happening throughout the show. However, this is the first one where the art style is different from their reality. It's not recollecting a specific time in their lives, but more of remembering a feeling of their nostalgia for a more peaceful time. We then switch art styles again in the climax of the episode during Isha's sacrifice, where we transition into this colorful sketch art of Isha's remembrance of her time with Jinx. Even though watercolor was already used, opting for sketch art instead gives us this feeling of childlike innocence, looking at the relationship from the purity of a child's perspective, regardless of the violence that Jinx has shown her multiple times. We see Isha's warped reality that only a child would have, looking at only the good and fun times that she had with Jinx and how much she sees her as a role model. And in this split moment, it clicks inside of Jinx's head that Isha loves her so much, she's willing to put herself in harm's way no matter the cost in order to protect her time and time again. This is amplified even more with Victor's ending monologue. That which inspires us to our greatest good is also the cause of our greatest evil. This quote sums up Isha and Jinx's entire relationship dynamic. One inspires the other to be good, but are also the reason why they do terrible things. Jinx inspires Isha to want to protect those she cares about, and so she constantly puts herself in danger in order to protect Jinx. And even though Jinx tries so hard to be good for Isha, she's also the reason why she is becoming so corrupt and rebellious. And that realization is what brings Jinx along her downhill spiral. The music choice for the scene is also interesting for American viewers, choosing a foreign language for a character who's mute. There's a movie that came out in 2022 called Watcher, directed by Chloe Okuno. In it, an American couple moves to Bucharest for the husband's job. The wife isn't fluent in the language, however the husband is, playing with the idea that even though she's not alone and within close proximity of people, she still feels distant and isolated because of the language barrier. To help push that feeling, the movie intentionally doesn't use subtitles, even though Romanian is spoken for a decent amount of the movie, making the audience feel just like the main character, lost and alone. Arcane uses a parallel of this idea by using a foreign song in this sequence, making us have to understand the scene and emotions through visuals and melody, breaking the language barrier that Isha has to fight through. Even though the song's her goodbye letter to Jinx, we as an American audience don't understand, giving us a small glimpse into the frustrations that Isha goes through in her life trying to explain herself. A frame within a frame is a very prominent theme throughout the entire series. It's the technique of using a shape of any sort to isolate or bring to attention a character among other feelings that the director wants to express. It's one of the most fun compositions to stage, and Arcane uses this technique in order to convey feelings of loneliness, isolation, unattachment, or to highlight relationships. Not only does the show stuff each frame with hidden Easter eggs to get people excited, it also tries to jam as much visual language as it can into a single frame, especially within season 2. Mixing this, traditional camera techniques, and its oil painting aesthetic, the show almost ascends its animation to becoming something more lifelike without having to rely on hyperrealism. A small example of this is in Season 2, Episode 2, Watch It All Burn, when Victor first awakes. He stumbles out of his cocoon and we see Jace sitting in between the frame of Victor's legs, along with leading lines in a horizon. Victor calls out for Jace, where he then turns around and we see him through a frame created through Victor's arms. Visually, we immediately see the disconnect between the two, even though only 2 words have been said. We're given a feeling that these two are already worlds apart before any dialogue is really exchanged between the two characters.
Our paths diverged long ago. It was affection that held us together.
Another example is in Season 1, when Jace is contemplating suicide. We're shown a frame within a frame, heightening our emotions for how lost, isolated, and alone he feels. This is where he was denied help from his sponsors with Caitlyn's family, expelled from the academy, and his research tossed away. Later on, we see Victor at the Piltover Dam contemplating suicide himself after the death of Skye, and we see the two in a frame within a frame to show their bond with each other. The only other time we see Victor in this same shot is when he's talking to his former mentor Heimerdinger. Both are very important people in Victor's otherwise lonesome and tragic life. Frames within a frame are constant throughout the show, along with passageways and doorways showing metaphorical journeys for a character, showcasing inner turmoil, a shift in a character's perspective, or a transformation in the character's life. Jace looking out at Victor's new world haven, Vi and Jinx reconnecting with Vander. There's even a scene of Jace at the bottom of a canyon where he looks up to where the opening is Ionic, symbolizing his birth of new life when he escapes the cavern. Mash cuts are also prominent throughout the show along with smash cuts, making sequences seamlessly flow together, creating a faster pace to the story. I love how much the show uses different techniques to try and tell as much as they can without saying anything. One thing that caught my eye during the second season was the recreation of a split diopter. A split diopter is a camera lens that uses two different glasses, making the background be as detailed as the foreground. This lets the director fake a deep focus without having to use a wide-angle lens for shots where they want a tighter frame. However, some directors choose to have it be more apparent as part of their signature touch, like De Palma movies. You can tell that something is shot on a split diopter by the difference of focal points. Everything is in focus even though a subject is closer to the camera while the other is far away, especially if you see a blurred or soft focus outlining a character. Toy Story 4 did the same thing, recreating a split diopter within their animated world to give us more visual language. Arcane uses the same approach, utilizing a split diopter to show that a character is tricking another one, manipulating the person they're talking to, or withholding information. Throughout the show, we as an audience are omnipotent. We see everything that the characters do, their motivations, and their feelings, except when it comes to anything related to the Black Rose. Coincidentally, a split diopter is only used with characters that are related to the subplot and propelling it forward. And it makes the scene where Mbessa is talking to Caitlyn have a little more depth to it. Mbessa is only interested in gaining access to Hextech and power in order to fight off the Black Rose. Although she sees Caitlyn as a formidable ally, she's also manipulating her to get her to her own goal. This scene, although seemingly a way to show us that Mbessa is trying to bond with Caitlyn and give her advice, because of the use of this technique, that's not the case in this scenario. She doesn't want Caitlyn to find Jinx to settle her vendetta. She's weaponizing her grief in order to gain control of the Undercity through the use of Hextech weaponry. And knowing Caitlyn is so set on revenge, she also mocks her by telling her that she can just forgive Jinx and let her go, making Caitlyn want to continue the pursuit and see Mbessa as an ally.
Maybe you have the strength I do not, to forgive and trust in tomorrow. The decision is yours, Commander.
Staging of characters, especially when it comes to the Noxians and the relationship between Mbessa and Mel, is also very interesting through the use of the diagonal method. We see this method being used whenever Mbessa and Mel share any screen time with one another. Notice how Mbessa is constantly framed towering over Mel, visually telling us the dynamic of their relationship without even speaking a word. Even when Mbessa is sitting on a chair lower than where Mel stands, we still visually see her conform to this diagonal composition to emphasize their power balance. Whenever Mbessa isn't sharing the screen with her daughter, Mel is constantly in compositions of power, whether she's in the center of the frame, has leading lines leading up to her, or staging her for a diagonal composition. This is especially apparent when sharing the screen with Jace. She is constantly either in the center of the composition or at a higher level than Jace is at, showing her power over him. When she's not in a higher portion of the frame, this is usually when she's trying to seduce him by being attracted to his power. For comparison, in Season 2, we see Mbessa's power diagonal shift, where we constantly see Caitlyn in a higher part of the frame than her. And Arcane plays around with this technique throughout the second season through these two characters. When Caitlyn is Wolf of Wall Streeted to become a warring general, she's more powerful than Mbessa at this point, and so she's higher in the frame. When Caitlyn heads into the tent with Vi, both are at a higher part of the frame than Mbessa and even Rictus when he's standing up, foreshadowing their hidden attack that they don't know about yet. When Mbessa is fighting against her at the climax, now Mbessa is more powerful in that moment. Arcane plays with their power struggle in this way throughout the show and even uses scenes where the two are on an even eye level, or at least close to it, showing how Mbessa sees Caitlyn as an equal. Even though she's using Caitlyn as a means to an end, she still respects her fundamentals, almost as if she was the daughter that she always wanted but never had. To push this idea even further, notice how after Mel is taken by the Black Rose, the two characters meet again, still with Mbessa being in a higher portion of the frame. It's not until the end of their fight scene that we see this dynamic change when Mbessa dies. Between the two seasons, you can see how much the show uses the environment to help push the personalities and backstory of their characters. At the top, we have Piltover, which is very clean with ivory-colored towers and straight lines in their architecture. This is what's called Art Deco. The style represents feelings of luxury, elegance, wealth, sophistication, and progress, all traits that Piltover tries to uphold in their city and citizens. This environment helps push the narrative of the characters that reside in the city, like Caitlyn and Jace. This stereotype is one of the key walls that the show tries to break down for their characters throughout the show. While Piltover is more of an Art Deco style, Zaun has an Art Nouveau type of architecture that has more organic shapes and floral motifs. Almost the exact opposite of what Piltover is like. You can almost separate the two seasons by their composition style along with their environment. Season 1 is more gritty and action-packed with medium shots and close-ups and an ever-moving camera, and Piltover is more locked-off shots and wide angles due to its sophistication and eliteness. Even though there's so much that's different between the two seasons, there's also a striking amount of similarities between them. The most obvious is the role reversal between Vi and Caitlyn, where Vi was more hardened and spiteful against anything Piltover related, with Caitlyn being more understanding of the citizens of the Undercity in Season 1. Season 2 turns Caitlyn into a more spiteful character towards Zaun, with Vi having to reel her back in. There's so many similarities in the interaction between the two characters, down to even the jail scene when they first met to the jail scene when they first slept together. This becomes a pretty common trend between the two seasons, drawing parallels to past relationships and events. There's so many repeating factors and shots in the story, reinforcing the idea of duality and the repetition of history, drawing parallels to scenes and characters to emphasize their connection between each other and pivotal moments of the show. The amount of character and world building throughout the two seasons is pretty remarkable with how detailed and in-depth they constructed them. Each character is so complex, even the ones that aren't part of the roster of the League of Legends universe, with Silco being the most apparent of it. Even Isha's got a complex and fleshed out narrative without saying a single word. Out of everything that the show does, this is probably one of the positives of the show that stands out the most. We're hardly given a single flat character, which is pretty impressive considering the large roster. The show's characters also grew throughout the two seasons, becoming different with significant changes to their personas with each time skip. There's a lot that the show does well, and character writing is definitely one of them for both male and female characters in a very feminist way. Most, if not all, of the female characters in the show can almost be replaced by men and the story would still work the same way. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an all-encompassing good thing. It's just that the universe the show takes place in kind of just changes the whole dynamic. And I think it's because it acts within a world where there is already equality, with no signs of gender stereotypes ever being a thing in the history of its universe. We have women in roles of power and women in masculine roles. There isn't even a stigma when it comes to homosexuality in the show. This makes writing a female character in this type of world so different. It actually makes it difficult to have a character not be switchable in gender. This makes Arcane probably one of the most feminist pieces of media that's been made to date. I also find it interesting that the show delves into homosexuality and queer coding. I know that one of the creators already stated that Victor and Jace aren't gay, but from the context of what we see in the show, the characters, at least in my opinion, are pretty queer-coded. For context, queer-coding characters has been a thing in film for a long time. Thelma and Louise, Le Diabolique, Mulan. It's a way for filmmakers to talk about topics without just outright saying it through the use of literary devices. Especially when homosexuality was more of a taboo topic, queer-coding characters gave a way for people to talk about something people weren't comfortable to talk about. For example, vampires are very queer-coded. You have people of the same sex sucking on each other's necks and relishing in it on both sides. In Arcane, Jace and Victor share an undeniable connection with each other that, at least to me, comes across as being queer-coded, and this is backed up by the representation of homosexuality throughout the show. I enjoy this interpretation because it makes the dynamic between Jace's relationship with Mel and Victor become symbolic of his struggle with his bisexuality. There's a scene of Victor looking up at Jace in the first season with intimate eyes, saying his name for the first time, which is the same shot that Mel is in just before sleeping with Jace. And in that sequence, it even ends with Mel being alone in bed after they have sex and having a match cut to Victor laying in bed with Jace being next to him, especially when their sex scene is so intertwined with Victor. There's shots of Victor being bent over with Jace in the background, being held for a suspiciously long amount of time. How Victor always seems to show up in Jace's thoughts when he's thinking of Mel, the way they embrace each other into death, how Victor continues to wear the blanket Jace gives to him even though he doesn't sense a feeling of being cold.
Cold? No, I don't think so.
Dialogue is also exchanged between the two characters that also feels as though there's homosexual subtext in it.
Our paths diverged long ago. It was affection that held us together.
I find this interesting because apparently in the Chinese version of the show, this piece of dialogue of Victor saying affection is replaced. Which, why would it be unless it's being censored due to China's stance on homosexuality to the point of censoring scenes that represent it?
All I want is my partner back.
There's just so many different words Jace could use, like friend, brother, colleague. It just feels too coincidental for him to constantly refer to Victor as his partner.
But I've come with Victor, my partner. Partner. Partners.
As a whole, Arcane isn't a perfect show. There's problems with its pacing and plot bloating. But even then, the show is a masterclass of both writing and animation, and watching it multiple times, you still find new things and different perspectives. It's fun seeing characters that people are so attached to interacting with one another on a grand scale and visually feeling their emotions. With such a large IP, it would have been easy to create something lowbrow as a marketing ploy like so many companies before them. But instead, we're given this love letter with creators dedicated to these characters, building this world unlike any other. And it's surprising seeing how fast the production company has grown since the first season with how confident the second season is. And as with all adaptations, it's always going to be divisive. But Arcane handles its representation of the League of Legends universe so well that the line is almost minimal, which is a huge feat to accomplish for an animated series where it punches way above its weight class. Which makes me so excited to see what the next installment of this universe is going to be like. Because although Arcane isn't a perfect show, it's damn near close to it.